Hi, I'm actor Ian Champion, and welcome to History of Horror Cinema, my personal podcast tour of the good, bad, and the ugly of horror movie history. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe. Stereo, 1969. David Cronenberg began his career as a filmmaker in Canada without any formal film school training. There was no such schooling available in his home country. His background was in science, having spent a year at university studying organic chemistry. He had a particular fascination for entomology, the study of insect life, and this scientific aspect influenced much of his work. Clinics dealing with human scientific potential, the body horror infestation of insectoid parasitic attack, all are recurring themes, and one can see the seeds of a lot of this in Stereo, his first film of length. At just over 1 hour, it's a film record of the behavior of 8 young students under observation at the fictional CAEE, the Canadian Academy for Erotic Inquiry, by the unseen Dr. Stringfellow. They are being studied as part of an experiment whereby they are given telepathic abilities and then observed in social and private behaviors on a day-to-day basis. The scenes are all in black and white and silent, overlaid with voiceovers from august-sounding experts recounting the intended theories and results over the course of 3 months. We are introduced to them via one participant, Ronald Mlodzik, grandly dressed in an opera cloak and bearing a cane, who gains entry into the sterile, barren, and vaguely sinisterly architected institute. Gradually, we see all the students at play with each other, flirting, having sex, eating and enjoying other sensory pleasures, all presumably being recorded elsewhere. As the film progresses, the narration discusses various tested phenomena, such as the understanding that in order for telepathy to be strong, the subjects must form meaningful relationships with each other. Also, they are administered drug capsules that are hoped to induce a capacity for omnisexuality, to demolish the walls of conventional sexual constraint. Eventually, we are told that 2 unexpected consequences have occurred, that a number of the participants committed suicide, one by piercing his skull with an electric drill, and that Dr. Stringfellow himself became highly agitated as a result of his separation from the students after the experiment had concluded, concluding that the telepathic relationships established were two-way in nature. By being presented as a scientific observation of subjects, the tone of Stereo is cool and removed, but as the events unfold in an episodic way without any connecting thread, it's very disjointed and uninvolving. The detached style invites the same in reaction, especially as most of the interesting information is merely told, not shown. It is, however, interesting to spot the themes and obsessions that will crop up in Cronenberg's future films. Scanners and The Brood will deal directly with parapsychological human talents harnessed by professionally run private clinics, and the study of human sexuality in all its taboos and kinks, etc., will occur often, most blatantly in a dangerous method. Cronenberg deserves credit as well for making his own films at this stage, where, before the Cinepix funding for Shivers, he was having to do all of his own filming and editing, learning as he went on the job. Shivers, 1975. By 1974, David Cronenberg was worried that after 3 years his film directing dream would never properly come to fruition. He'd made his 2 short experimental films, Stereo and Crimes of the Future, and the TV shows he was hired for had not helped to build a reputation. He went to Los Angeles, wondering after reluctance if he would have to consider being part of the Hollywood machine to get funding for his latest script, Orgy of the Blood Parasites. Roger Corman's company loved it, feeling its inexpensive, sensational horror premise would be viable for their undemanding drive-in audience, a sure feeling for the box office, and a support of young filmmakers that made this recently sadly lost producer a great loss to the industry in May 2024. Upon returning to Canada, Cronenberg suddenly found that the exploitation company Cinepix had come through with backing themselves, and so, in wary conjunction with the government body, the Canadian Film Development Corporation, his first feature was in business to the tune of 179,000 Canadian dollars. He narrowly avoided an early assimilation into Hollywood by just 1 month. This is something which he has still adhered to, having never shot any of his films in the industry environments of Los Angeles. Shivers deals with the horrific transmission of parasites between residents in the lavish apartments of the new Starliner high-rise complex on the fictional Starliner Island in Montreal. It is activated by the creation of a parasite by Dr. Hobbs, who infects his young mistress with it as an experiment to connect people to their primal, fleshy selves, but doesn't realize how free his mistress is with her affections. Hobbs kills his mistress early on and then himself, but he is too late to stop the infection outbreak. Thus, the leech-like creatures are passed orally amongst the whole building, causing a psychosexual frenzy of lust and homicide-driven insanity across the Starliner's occupancy. Finally, after the heroic efforts of the medical clinic's doctor results in his being infected also, we see that come the morning, the hordes of libidinous occupants now drive out into the city and beyond, now apparently normal but calmly focused on spreading the terrifying contagion. Yet again, this bears slightly uncomfortable parallels with our situation now, as in the period in which I wrote this podcast, it was a few years before the pandemic. Shooting covered August to September 1974 and was a valuable first opportunity for Cronenberg to understand how to delegate to a professional crew. For his previous films, he had been forced to handle all the technical roles himself. Now he needed to learn the various departments' names and duties and entrust them. Fortunately, he had Ivan, later famous for Ghostbusters, Reitman as producer and music composer, as well as Joe Blasco, whose underskin bladder effects earned great admiration from makeup guru Dick Smith, who had pioneered the technique. Cronenberg also saved money by living in one of the apartments in the Nuns Island high-rise used for shooting, by doubling it as the effects workroom. He had intended to use real leeches for the close-ups, but they were accidentally frozen by a fellow crew member in the freezer. The cast was made up of virtual unknowns for the most part, except for Lynn Lowry, who, as we saw, had already been in George Romero's The Crazies the year before, as the nurse here, and famous horror genre star Barbara Steele as the vampy lesbian Betts. Those who've seen Stereo and Crimes of the Future will recognize Ron Molodzik as the unruffled, soothing promotional agent for Starliner. It's also his voice you hear as well on the promo film at the start, selling the complex's virtues. I actually imitated his understated, sinister tones for the trailer I did for the video game Paradigm in 2017. If you find it on YouTube, you'll see what I mean. He has a chillingly effective scene near the end, where he helps take a terrified couple to a room and then reveals it's a trap to throw them to the libidinous wolves waiting for their next sexual victim. Paul Hampton, the smooth Dr. Roger St. Luc, is overly relaxed for the most part until the tension is amped to critical. He is more famous in real life as a writer of pop songs. Probably the most accomplished performer of the supporting cast is Joe Silver, as the researcher Rollo Linsky, making the connections between Dr. Hobbs, the girl, and the infection. He is also, curiously, almost never seen without eating a pickle, even when driving. The horror sequences and the almost documentary feel of Shivers have a nightmarishly effective tone. Despite some haphazard acting and awkward fight scenes, they have a macabre edge. The passing of the parasite through the throats of Steele and Lowry is very unsettling, as are the corridor rampages, and a great sequence where St. Luc escapes outside from the pool only to be confronted by a zombie-esque chain of residents looming up out of the dark. It's not surprising that there are staging weaknesses occasionally in the scenes. Because of the intense budget strain, many more setups had to be shot each day than would be normal, including effects, car crashes, etc. The title changed upon release to The Parasite Murders, and then finally, once the French-Canadian distributors saw how well it did under the French title Frisson, they used the English equivalent Shivers, also known as They Came From Within in the USA. French critics saw the film as almost a political attack on the insulated middle-class bourgeoisie, and Cronenberg at least agreed enough to admit that people vicariously enjoy the scenes where guys kick down doors and do whatever they want to the people inside. In the UK, James Furman's BBFC passed Shivers uncut, which is slightly surprising as he was known for being highly sensitive to combinations of sex and violence. Clearly, he felt that there was justification for sexualized brutality in the plot. There were complaints back in Canada from appalled people getting wind of taxpayers' money being used to fund such a graphically unpleasant horror movie. However, unlike many, it made a profit. Like Clive Barker later, Cronenberg had no patience with the idea of hiding the horror from the audience. As he put it, the very purpose was to show the unshowable, to speak the unspeakable. Also, as he pointed out, in a film that relies on visual depictions, if you cut away from the effects shots, the audience wouldn't know what was happening. Shivers not only made money, it began to make the writer-director's reputation in the horror field. Even Martin Scorsese was quoted as admiring the ending's power. The last scene, with the cars going out to infect the entire world, is something I've never been able to shake. The perversion of science for human experimentation, the revolt of the body from the inside against its owner, public panic in the face of infection, all these themes would be developed by David Cronenberg in the follow-on Rabid, and then combined and augmented in the decades to come. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe.